The enduring shortcoming in most Ubisoft games of the last several generations has been a tendency towards repetitious content. Year in, year out, they seem to rely upon that which has already been established instead of that which is new and novel. By far, they have proven themselves to be one of the most frustrating game developers on the scene today, thanks, primarily, to this complacency. What's more, they have shown their capacity for innovation in a select few releases, wherein they flexed their imaginative capabilities, namely Assassin's Creed Origins from 2017 and Far Cry 3 from 2012 to name two, which of course makes their lack of ambition nowadays all the more frustrating. Far Cry 3 pushed the narrative envelope beyond that which anyone believed was possible at the time. It is easy to forget, but Voss and all of his antics were beyond anything like we had seen before. Even to this day, he's commonly ranked as one of the best villains of all time, at least in the video game space. Furthermore, the storytelling from a first-person perspective, when paired with the darker subject matter, made Far Cry 3 one of the most memorable experiences that many players have had in the last decade. I know that's at least the case for me. As for Assassin's Creed Origins in 2017, it is important to stress just how big of a departure this was from the Assassin's Creed games that came before. Assassin's Creed prior to this title was known for large open worlds that usually centered around a single city and small satellite maps or levels in the immediate area. Add to that a clunky combat system based off of basic attack and parry systems, an often meandering and convoluted story, and a good number of technical issues to boot, and you had a typical flagship Assassin's Creed title. But when Origins came up on the scene, we saw something very different. Not only was the game graphically impressive and highly polished, but it also featured a game map that was built to emulate the entire country of Egypt. Literally an entire country. Beyond this, in my opinion, the vast and expansive map featured some of the most unique side quests and memorable missions of any Ubisoft game that's ever released. I still remember the first time that I climbed atop Khufu's pyramid and surveyed the unending expanse before me. It really was a surreal moment, a moment that would only be possible in a video game. And it's in moments like these that Ubisoft captures the imaginations of their fans. It's moments like these when they're at their best. In the last few years, it seems as though Ubisoft has gone back to pushing out content before it's ready, rushing it to meet arbitrary deadlines set by upper management that often is not involved in any way, shape, or form in the development process. In fact, in many cases, this upper-level management doesn't even have experience in video game development. They're simply financiers, production coordinators, or white-collar executives that are great at managing decimal points but terrible at managing artists. Now, let me be clear, I'm not bashing management writ large. Managers in large organizations are a necessary evil, especially when you're talking about a company of Ubisoft's size. Thousands of employees need to be coordinated in order to make sure that a release can launch on time and in one piece. However, it's important to note that managing artists is far different than managing, for instance, a team of investment brokers. While a broker may be entirely motivated by the paycheck that they'll receive at the end of the day, week, or year, an artist is often much more concerned with the product that they're delivering. Not to say that one motivation is inherently better than the other, because after all, a larger paycheck can be used for many different things, including artistic pursuits outside of the workplace, but nonetheless, these motivations are different. As a result, the managerial approach needs to be different. Unfortunately, it seems as though Ubisoft has been unable in recent years to navigate this treacherous sea. I think this because Ubisoft has found themselves releasing buggy games that are often seen as unfinished and lacking any sort of creative or artistic influence. The perfect example would be, of course, Ghost Recon Breakpoint. This game launched in October of 2019 after being developed by Ubisoft Paris. There's no other way to explain it than the following. The game was broken. Name any type of bug and it was likely present. Name any type of exorbitant monetization scheme and it was likely present. Name any AAA game development trope for an online tactical shooter and it was likely present. The backlash that they received upon this game's launch was unlike anything they had ever seen before or since. The uproar led to the demotion of several managers, restructuring of entire teams, and the delays of effectively every AAA title that Ubisoft was set to release in late 2019 and early 2020. Now here I really do feel like we should take a second and applaud Ubisoft for this choice. They didn't have to delay everything in their lineup, even though it seems as though it was the only reasonable thing to do. But nonetheless, the choice to delay these games and give the development studios the necessary time to polish and prepare these games for launch was the correct decision, and we should applaud it, because nowadays that's pretty rare. However, after all of this, I was left wondering whether or not this would be enough. After all, most of these games that were delayed had been in development for years before this delay. How much of an effect would this actually have? Would these games still feature predatory in-game markets? Would these games still be built with the same copy and pasted content, lacking any sort of creative zeal? Well, I resigned myself to the conclusion that I would have to wait and see, likely until the games launched. But it's at this point that I can reveal that I'm very fortunate to have been invited to several Ubisoft preview events. One of the preview events was for an upcoming game that is a new IP for Ubisoft. This game was originally and initially viewed as a knockoff of myriad titles. It seemed to be the embodiment of everything that was wrong with Ubisoft, copy and pasted content that played it safe instead of taking risks and doing something different. This game's graphics weren't very flashy, the story was obscure, and the name was needlessly convoluted. Yet, it has proven itself an impressive presentation of Ubisoft's greatest capabilities. In many ways, a complete rebuke of all of the aforementioned tropes besotting Ubisoft titles for the last decade. Of course, I'm talking about Roller Champions. This game has captivated me. It's fresh, it rolls off the tongue, it skates past any criticism I could muster against it. Okay, enough with the crappy jokes. Okay, of course I'm talking about Immortals Fenyx Rising. Immortals Fenyx Rising is a game that I initially disregarded. Originally entitled Gods and Monsters, this new IP from Ubisoft seemed a fair bit underwhelming. It initially appeared to be the perfect mashup of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, at least in terms of art style and navigation, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey in terms of mythology and combat. But very little was shared about the game when it was initially announced. They left a lot up to the imaginations of those who were interested. And I found this a little confusing initially because it seemed as though they were withholding information from the players. But this can be done for very valid reasons, such as balancing hype and managing expectations, so don't think that I'm being dismissive merely for its own sake. The point is that for the last 6+ months, I've been very skeptical towards this game. I had no reason to like it and no reason to dislike it. In a word, I was apathetic. But all of that changed when I got my hands on the game for 4 hours. This particular demo went through the opening section of the game, the opening cutscenes, tutorials, and the first exposure to the open world. It was narratively focused, centering on the justification for the world, characters, and the mechanics. For the first hour or so, the game moves pretty slow. It opens up incredibly fast after the first title plate is shown, and after a few more hours of gameplay in this expansive world, I couldn't help but feel utterly baffled. As I stated earlier, Ubisoft tends to rely on repetition, recreating the same systems and mechanics that worked previously. They rely on themes, art styles, and world design that have proved themselves successful. And so when I saw just how different Immortals Fenyx Rising was, I was completely flabbergasted. Now, of course, I have to mention that I get crapped on a lot for being overly positive towards certain games. I'm often accused of having too optimistic an outlook towards open-world adventure games and of overlooking criticisms of quantity over quality in favor of complementing the volume of content present in the game. And while I think that's a fair criticism of me, namely that I tend to be very positive towards open-world games, I don't think it's always fair to dismiss my opinion of a game merely for this reason. I like open-world games. Sue me. I know it's bizarre to see a gaming YouTuber that can speak positively about things nowadays, but I'm not going to apologize for enjoying what I see to be quality titles. Rather, I want you to understand that I don't compliment things lightly. For instance, I really wanted to enjoy Ghost of Tsushima, but after spending roughly 10+ hours with the game agonizing over my lack of enjoyment, I finally settled on the conclusion that the game just wasn't for me. But instead of making videos trying to tear it apart or criticize it, I decided to simply stay mum on the subject. If somebody asks me on a live stream what I think of the game, I will tell them honestly. By the way, if you want to be notified of when I go live, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you get notified of the next time I go live here on YouTube. That being said, I will tell them honestly that I just don't get it. I'm not going to pretend as though I hate or enjoy something just for the clicks. Ghost of Tsushima received a profound amount of praise at launch. Praise that I'm sure it earned, and I'm not questioning the motivations of those that spoke out positively about the game. What I am saying is that it would have been very easy for me to pretend as though I enjoyed the game because it would have been good for the channel to make a lot of videos reacting very positively. However, that would have been a lie. I don't get the game. It doesn't click with me. I don't find it fun. I find it remarkably underwhelming. So for me to pretend as though it did something amazing would be disingenuous. And I owe you, the viewer, more than that. All of this to say that I honestly think that Immortals Fenyx Rising could very well be the best game that Ubisoft has launched in the last decade. And I honestly think that I can justify that gigantic claim too. Of course, I'm limited to a certain degree because I'm not able to share with you everything that I saw in the preview. Ubisoft naturally asks reviewers and people that are given access to the demos to withhold certain information to avoid spoilers, something that I think is completely fair. That being said, I'm going to do my best to argue my point with these limiting constraints. I have 3 basic points that I'm allowed to share and explain: the writing, the tone, and the world design. To begin with the writing, this game is really freaking funny. In almost every single conversation that I had during the 4 hours of gameplay, there were one-liners and quips that made me actually laugh out loud. It's really easy for these games to turn into a cringe fest when they try to be funny, but in this case, I can actually safely say that I found these characters endearing and hilarious in an effortless way that made them seem more genuine and not less. Furthermore, the characters are so much fun, and I would say endearing, that I felt urged to continue playing just so that I could see more of them. Truly, the game's writing, while not grounded or emotionally taxing in the same way that a Naughty Dog title may be, it's still captivating and engaging enough to motivate the player to engage in the gameplay loop, which is, in my opinion after all, the operative purpose of a narrative within a game. But you can't discuss a game's story without discussing the tone that the story follows. The tone is what dictates the structure of the quests, how the characters behave by themselves and with each other, and even has an impact on the art design. In other words, the tone is likely the most important part of a game's design during the concept phase. It's for this reason that Bethesda Game Studios tends to design their games around a singular picture or even landscape. Todd Howard has spoken at length about the initial design process surrounding Skyrim. For that game, he spent the initial months of design focusing on a small action figure that he had on his desk. It was a Viking-looking character who was dual-wielding and had an ornate set of armor equipped. He's even quoted as saying,
"This actually was one of the original designs of Skyrim. What is the experience of Skyrim? I bought this Conan action figure like years ago, just sitting on my desk. People would say, so what are we doing for the next Elder Scrolls? And I would Just point to the figure.
But when it comes to Immortals Fenyx Rising, I think the phrase was limitless adventure. Pair with that the obvious influences of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which was, after all, the last game that this team worked on, and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and you get a game that could prove to be one of the best open-world exploration titles ever made. And I know that's a lofty statement. And because I'm admitting to that knowledge, you should know that I don't make that statement lightly. I honestly and truly believe that this game could be, and likely is, something special. But that brings us to the world design. You see, one of the reasons that I feel as though I can make this proclamation so confidently is because the game really does mash up the best parts of Breath of the Wild and the best parts of Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It takes nods from the art style, the dungeon layouts, and the shrine structuring, and even the expansive, captivating map of Breath of the Wild, and it takes all of those things and combines them with the scale and complexity of Assassin's Creed Odyssey's world. A simple example would be that in Assassin's Creed, at least since Origins, you can climb anything, any surface, any terrain, anything. This was also true in Breath of the Wild. You could climb anything you wanted except for the walls in most shrines and divine beasts. That being said, if you wanted to climb a rock surface, for instance, you simply did just that. You climbed it. It didn't matter how the rock was laid out or necessarily what the angle of the cliff was. As long as the material was right and you have enough stamina, you could climb it. In Immortals Fenyx Rising, Ubisoft has implemented the same free running and free climbing system that they used in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, albeit somewhat altered to work in this art style. The most important thing about this difference is that Ubisoft's free climbing system is based on contextual object placement, whereas The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild's free climbing system is primarily based on materials, combined with weather that impacts them. And while it may not seem like an important difference, it's actually incredibly impactful on how the player explores the world. When everything is based off of the objects, you begin to look at the geometry of the cliff surfaces, the trees, and even the buildings that you hope to summit. You have to evaluate the shapes, sizes, and layouts of these structures before you take them on. And it's for this reason that I feel as though Immortals Fenyx Rising's free climbing system actually stands at an advantage over Breath of the Wild's. But all this just to say that I think there is reason to be very excited for this game. I can talk at length about the various systems, mechanisms, quest lines, or myriad other items that I'm impressed with when it comes to a certain game. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean much, especially considering that these are preview events where the developers are trying to put their best foot forward. They're trying to impress us. So I don't think that you should take this video as a reason to buy into excessive hype and endless speculation, but rather I think you should take it as a starting point of intrigue for a major game release that's coming very soon. For many people, this game has flown completely under the radar, and I think that's mostly because Ubisoft has a very stacked release schedule this year, thanks to all of those aforementioned delays. But I think it's important that you don't dismiss this game simply because a lot of the focus is being eaten up by Cyberpunk right now. There's a lot of amazing games coming out in the coming weeks and months. It's okay to be excited for more than one, and I think it's important to praise new IPs from studios known for relying on their past successes. So don't take this as a comprehensive endorsement, but rather as a recommendation that you keep your eye on this game. I really believe it's going to be something special. But that's all for me. If you liked this video, please show your support by pressing the like button and subscribing. It really does help. But having said all of that, thank you for watching. I love you all more than you could possibly know, and I'll see you in the next video.